It was a day forever etched into my memory, my mother's funeral. Amid the sorrowful silence, my father arrived, brazenly holding hands with his mistress as though she were his rightful wife. When I could no longer contain myself and stood to object, she sneered and spat venom, calling me worthless, a parasite. Fury surged, and I lashed back, naming her the witch who had torn my family apart. Then came the slap. A strike so sharp it felt like it cracked my very soul. It wasn't from her, it was from my father. The man who once taught me to live with honor now stood beside his mistress, casting me out of the funeral, forbidding me from even saying goodbye to my mother. That moment carved a vow into my heart. I would never forget. I would never forgive. My name is Charles Beckwith. Now, at 35, I sit in a quiet house by the sea in Gulfport, Mississippi, staring out at the endless ocean. And I've decided to tell my story. Not as a plea for pity, but as proof that from the wreckage of tragedy, a man can still rise. But first, I must take you back to where it began, to the days when joy was real, and to the storm that shattered it all. I was born in Madison, Wisconsin, on a brisk autumn morning in 1990. My family was comfortably middle class, not rich, but secure enough to live without worry. My father, George Beckwith, was a mechanical engineer for a major manufacturing company on the city's edge. Tall, with a warm, commanding voice and a smile that seemed to ease any tension, he was a man I once believed unshakable. My mother, Annabelle, was an elementary school teacher, the gentlest woman I've ever known. She had long brown hair, eyes as blue as a clear summer sky, and a way of holding me each night that made the world seem safe and full of light. My childhood was a string of golden days. Our home sat in a peaceful neighborhood with a big backyard where I'd play with the kids next door. Mornings began with my mother's touch. Toast spread with peanut butter, a glass of warm milk, and a kiss on the cheek before I dashed off to school. Though my father often came home late, weekends were sacred. He'd take me fishing at Lake Mendota. "Son, life is like this fishing rod," he'd say, his voice steady as the water. "You must be patient, but when the chance comes, you hold on tight." I admired him deeply. He was my hero, strong, steady, a man of principle who urged me to live with integrity and never harm others. But if my father was strength, my mother was the soul of our home. She taught me more than math or neat handwriting, she taught me love. Each night she'd read me stories of knights and friendships that overcame every trial. "Charles," she'd whisper, brushing back my hair, "no matter where life takes you, family is where you return." Summers meant family picnics by the river. Winters meant Christmas by a glowing tree, the scent of her fresh-baked cookies filling the house while my father laughed and told stories from work. That was home. A place I thought unbreakable. But life rarely moves the way we hope. The cracks appeared slowly, so faint I barely noticed at first. At 23, I was finishing my degree in business at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, just a few hours from home. My days were consumed by classes, parties, and my girlfriend, Allison Young. I had met her in an economics lecture, and she quickly became the light in my hectic life. She had a radiant smile and an ability to listen that made me feel seen in a way no one else ever had. But every visit home unsettled me more. My father grew distant, staying out later and taking strange calls at night. My mother's spark faded. She still smiled, still cooked my favorite meals, but her eyes looked tired, red, swollen, as if carrying a weight too heavy to share. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just a little tired," she'd insist whenever I asked. My father brushed everything off as work. I wanted to believe them. I told myself it was stress, that things would pass. But then, one spring afternoon, everything unraveled. I had come home early, hoping to surprise my mother. "Mom, I'm home!" I called as I opened the door. Silence. Then whispers. I followed the voices into the living room. And there he was, my father, holding a strange woman in his arms on the sofa. Her name, I would soon learn, was Lorraine Shaw. Blonde hair, heavy makeup, and a smile dripping with arrogance. My father froze, pushing her away, fumbling for words. "Charles, you're home early." From the kitchen, my mother appeared. Her face was pale, her eyes brimming with silent grief. She said nothing, only turned away, wiping her tears. That was the day I discovered my father's affair. It wasn't hidden, it was shameless. And from then on, our lives descended into hell. He didn't stop. He paraded Lorraine openly, even daring to bring her into our home. As though my mother's pain didn't exist. And my mother, my kind, gentle mother, suffered in silence. She wept silently in her bedroom, ate at odd hours, and sometimes when I called home, I overheard her arguing on the phone. "George, how could you do this to me, to our son?" she cried during one call I accidentally overheard. My father's voice was cold, detached. "Annabelle, life is short. I just want to live for myself." I tried to comfort her whenever I came home, wrapping my arms around her fragile frame. She would only shake her head and whisper, "Don't worry, I'll be fine." But she wasn't fine. The grief was hollowing her out, piece by piece. Each day, the tension grew sharper. I remember her calls, her trembling voice. "Charles, your father came home late again. I don't know what to do." I urged her to confront him, to demand the truth, but my father only drifted further away. He even grew bold, boasting about Lorraine to his friends as if she were some prize to display. My mother endured in silence until the night came when her strength finally shattered. It was late, just after I had finished my final exams. She called me, her voice faint, frayed at the edges. "Son, I'm so tired. Your father, he says he wants a divorce." I tried to calm her, promising I'd come home the next morning. But that night, their final, vicious argument erupted. By dawn, the phone rang. It was my father. His voice trembled, panicked. "Charles, your mother. She's been in an accident." My heart collapsed. Through tears and frantic words, I learned the truth. After the argument, where my father declared he would move Lorraine into our home, my mother had stormed out, sobbing, and driven away. On the familiar road out of Madison, blinded by grief, she lost control and collided with a bus. She was gone instantly. No goodbye. No last words. I drove home like a man possessed, tears blurring my vision, screaming inside at the cruelty of it all. My father had betrayed her, and now she was lost to me forever. Her funeral was held 3 days later at the small church she used to pray in. The air was heavy with sorrow, the pews filled with relatives from far and near, mourning the gentle woman who had given her all and received so little in return. I tried to keep myself composed, taking care of the arrangements because my father seemed incapable of doing anything. But then, just as the coffin was carried in, he arrived. And he wasn't alone. He walked in holding Lorraine's hand. She wore black, but with gaudy makeup as though she were attending a party, not a funeral. Relatives whispered in disgust. Murmurs rippled through the church, their eyes wide with outrage. My blood boiled, heat rushing to my head until I thought I might explode. I stood stiff beside the old pews, my hands gripping my jacket, struggling to breathe, to hold myself together. The air was thick with the scent of lilies, my mother's favorite, flowers I had carefully chosen that morning. Her oak coffin lay adorned with them at the altar. Yet when I saw my father enter, his hand entwined with Lorraine's, something inside me collapsed. He wore a black suit, but on his lips was a smile that chilled me to the bone. Not the grief of a husband, not the sorrow of a father, but the smug expression of a man lost in his own selfish world beside the woman who had destroyed ours. Lorraine strutted proudly, blonde curls gleaming, lips painted crimson, her dress clinging to her like she was there to be admired. She held my father's hand high, her chin lifted, her eyes sweeping the room with brazen smugness. "My God!" I heard Aunt Mary whisper. "What's wrong with George? Bringing that woman here?" Another relative shook their head, muttering, "No shame." None at all. I clenched my fists. I told myself it was my mother's funeral, that I had to protect her dignity. But with every step they took closer to her coffin, my chest tightened until I couldn't bear it anymore. I turned to my father, my voice shaking. "Dad, what are you doing?" He stopped, his gaze like ice. "Lorraine came to pay her respects, son. She's my friend." Friend. The word stabbed me like a knife. My mother was barely gone, her memory still heavy in every corner of our home, and he dared call Lorraine his friend. I couldn't stay silent. Rage erupted, boiling past restraint. "She has no right to be here," I shouted, stepping forward, blocking their path. "She's the one who destroyed this family." The church fell into stunned silence. Every whisper stopped. All eyes turned to me. Lorraine arched an eyebrow, a cruel smile tugging at her lips. "Oh, the freeloading student," she sneered, her voice shrill, slicing through the air. "Who do you think you are to raise your voice? You're nothing but a useless parasite, living off your father's money." Her words poured gasoline on the fire raging in my chest. My hands shook with fury, my face burning. "You're a witch!" I roared, pointing at her. "You stole my father, and you killed my mother. You don't deserve to stand here." The words thundered through the church. Gasps erupted. Some covered their mouths. No one dared intervene. Lorraine laughed. A sharp, piercing laugh that cut through the grief like broken glass. But then, it was my father. The man who once held my hand when I fell off my bike, who taught me to cast the fishing line, who had once been my hero. He stepped forward, his face contorted with rage. "Enough, Charles!" he thundered. And before I could react, his hand lashed out. The crack of the slap echoed through the church like a whip, the sting exploding across my cheek. My head snapped to the side, my skin burning, but worse was the tearing inside my soul. "You ungrateful, disrespectful brat!" he spat. In that moment my world shattered. My father growled, his eyes flashing with fury. "How dare you speak to me like that? Get out! Now! You don't deserve to see your mother one last time." I froze, stunned, the world crumbling around me. The church fell silent. No one dared intervene. Aunt Mary rose, trying to approach, but someone restrained her. Lorraine lingered behind my father, arms crossed, a triumphant smirk etched across her face. I searched my father's eyes, looking for the man who had once loved me, who had once been my guide and protector. But he was gone, replaced by coldness, by distance, by someone I no longer recognized. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to wipe that smug smile off Lorraine's face. But I didn't. Not for fear of her, not for fear of my father, but for my mother. This was her day. I would not tarnish her memory with a brawl. I turned to the coffin, where my mother lay still and alone. "Mom!" I whispered silently, tears streaking my face. "I'm sorry." I longed to kneel, to touch her hand one last time, but my father's gaze felt like an invisible wall. "Go, Charles," he said, low and icy. "You don't belong here anymore." Step by heavy step, I walked out of the church. Aunt Mary's sobs, the whispers of relatives, Lorraine's faint, cruel chuckle, they followed me like shadows. I didn't notice how far I walked. When I finally stopped, I was standing by Lake Minota, the place my father had taken me fishing as a boy. The cold wind bit at my cheeks, mingling with my tears. I sank to the grass, hugging my knees, and let the grief pour out. I cried for my mother. I cried for the family we had lost. I cried for myself, a son abandoned by the one man who should have protected me on the most painful day of my life. From that moment, everything changed. I returned to my dorm at Northwestern, trying to focus on my final exams, but my mind was trapped in that church, in that slap, in my father's cold eyes. Allison, my girlfriend, was the only light. She listened as I poured out my story, never judging, just holding my hand quietly. "Charles, you're not alone," she whispered. "You have me. I'll always be here for you. Be strong." Her words comforted me, but they didn't heal the wound. I swore then that I would never forgive my father. I would live, not to prove anything to him, but so that my mother, wherever she was, could smile. Weeks later, I graduated. It should have been a joyful day, but I didn't invite my father. He didn't reach out either. Aunt Mary told me he had moved out, living with Lorraine in a lavish downtown Madison apartment. 3 months after the funeral, they were married. A quiet wedding, but enough to stir outrage among the relatives. "George has lost his mind," Aunt Mary said bitterly over the phone. "He married that woman as if Annabelle never existed." I didn't respond. I hung up quietly. I refused to hear anything about my father or Lorraine. I cut all contact. No calls, no texts, no meetings. He never tried to find me. Perhaps he thought I would calm down, that I would return to apologize. He was wrong. That slap hadn't just burned my cheek. It had severed the last thread between us. From that day forward, I vowed to live for myself, for my mother, and for those who truly loved me. But I knew the scar would never fade. It would follow me, a reminder of the day I lost my mother, and the father I once admired. I packed my things and left Evanston, starting a new chapter. Allison, my unwavering support through those dark days, became my guiding light. She suggested I move to Gulfport, Mississippi, where her family lived. "You need a fresh start, Charles," she said, eyes full of trust. "Come with me. We'll build a new life together." I agreed, not because I was ready, but because there was nothing left to hold on to except her. I carried my grief, my memories of my mother, and the vow that neither my father nor Lorraine would define my life. As the bus rolled past the endless wheat fields of Wisconsin, I traced my fingers over a family photo in my bag: my mother, father, and me at a summer picnic when I was 10. My mother beamed, my father had his arm around her, and I held a bright red kite. The last memory of a complete family before it all fell apart. "I'll live well, Mom," I whispered. "I'll make you proud." The journey ahead would not be easy. That slap, that day, had changed me forever, and I would have to learn to live with it, one step at a time. When I arrived in Gulfport, Mississippi, the summer heat was oppressive, thick with the scent of the sea. Allison waited at the bus station, her smile a cool breeze against the stifling air. "Welcome to Gulfport, love," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. I tried to smile, but it came out crooked. She took my hand, grabbed my suitcase, and led me to her small apartment on the edge of the city. "I know you're hurting," she whispered as we sank onto the worn sofa. "But you don't have to be strong alone. I'm here, and my family will be here too." Her words soothed me, but the pain from my mother's loss and my father's betrayal still smoldered like a wound that refused to close. Her family, Walter and Donna Young, welcomed me as one of their own, offering warmth I hadn't felt in years. They lived in a white wooden house by the coast, with a porch draped in blooming bougainvillea and the constant sound of waves crashing nearby. Walter, a retired ship captain, had a deep, resonant voice and eyes full of kindness. Donna, a devoted seamstress, was always busy with fabric, but never forgot to ask, "Charles, have you eaten enough? Want some more cornbread?" Their warmth reminded me of my mother, of our family dinners in Madison, and it eased the gnawing loneliness that clung to me. They never pressed about my father or the tragedy I'd endured, but I knew they understood. Allison had told them everything, and the way they looked at me said plainly, "Son, we'll be your family now." Life in Gulfport, however, wasn't as simple as I'd hoped. I started at a small real estate brokerage, eager to put my business degree to use. The work was harder than I expected. The coastal market was fiercely competitive, and clients were wary of a 23-year-old fresh out of college. Calls went unanswered. Deals slipped through my fingers. Nights stretched long, and sometimes I lay awake, wondering if I had the strength to continue. The pain of losing my mother and the betrayal of my father shadowed every thought, always threatening to pull me under. In those dark moments, memories of my mother kept me anchored. I recalled her gentle smile, her soothing bedtime stories, the warmth of her hand as she whispered, "Charles, you're stronger than you think." I kept our family photo on my desk, staring into her eyes when I felt despair rising. "Mom, I can't let you down," I whispered, as though she could still hear me. Allison was my other pillar. She worked long hours at a small law office, yet always found time to call. "How's your day, love? Need me to bring coffee?" she'd ask. Her unwavering belief in me carried me through days when I doubted myself. But I wasn't always strong. Some nights, I dreamed of my mother standing by Lake Minota, her hair blowing in the wind as she called my name. I'd run toward her, but before I could reach her, I'd see my father and Lorraine laughing triumphantly, pulling her away. I'd wake drenched in sweat, heart hammering, haunted by the slap, by my father's cold eyes. I heard nothing from him for 12 long years. Occasionally, Aunt Mary would call, reporting that he lived happily with Lorraine, now Mrs. Beckwith, in a luxurious Madison apartment, as though my mother and I had never existed. Each time, I nodded, hung up, and tried to bury the memory. Still, I refused to drown in sorrow. I learned to stand one step at a time. 6 months in, I landed my first clients, an elderly couple seeking a beachside vacation home. I won them over with honesty and sincerity. That first sale felt like a shaft of light breaking through the darkness. I remember holding the modest commission check and taking Allison to a small seafood restaurant. "I did it, Allison," I said, trying to hide the elation threatening to spill over. She squeezed my hand. "I knew you would." From that moment, I threw myself into work, determined to prove myself. I learned to negotiate, read clients' needs, and transform empty plots into dream homes. I worked day and night, sometimes falling asleep at my desk, buried under paperwork. There were failures, deals canceled at the last minute, clients lost because of my inexperience. But each setback reminded me of my mother's words: family is where you return to, no matter where life takes you. Now, my family was Allison, Walter, and Donna. The people who never abandoned me. By 2018, after 5 years of relentless work, I had begun making a name for myself. I was promoted to regional manager, overseeing a small team of brokers. My salary increased, and I moved from a rundown apartment into a tidy place near the beach. Allison and I began talking about the future. One evening, walking along the shore, I said, "I want to marry you." She laughed, her eyes sparkling in the moonlight. "Then propose to me, Charles Beckwith." I had no ring, only a promise, but she said yes. We celebrated our engagement simply, with Walter and Donna and a bottle of inexpensive wine. To me, it was the happiest moment since my mother's passing. We married a year later in the Youngs' backyard. Allison wore a simple white dress, her hair pinned up, looking every bit like an angel. As she walked toward me, I felt for the first time in years that I wasn't alone. Walter placed a hand on my shoulder. "Son, you've found a new family. Don't let the past hold you back." I nodded, but deep inside, the echo of that slap and my father's cold gaze still lingered. Life moved forward. Allison and I worked hard, saving every penny. I began investing in real estate, buying small plots, renovating them, and reselling. Slowly, my career stabilized, and I felt a growing sense of pride. Yet beneath it all, a scar remained. Every time I drove past open fields, I thought of Wisconsin, of my mother, and sometimes of my father. I never reached out, never called, never sought answers. But occasionally I wondered, did he ever regret it? Did he ever think of us? Gulfport taught me that life waits for no one. Pain may linger, but if you don't keep moving forward, it will consume you. I vowed not to let that happen. Each morning, I rose at 5, brewed coffee, and sat at my table surrounded by contracts and stacks of paperwork. Real estate wasn't glamorous. Some days I drove for hours, showing clients sandy, mosquito-infested lots, only to hear, "We'll think about it." Some nights I stayed awake, crunching numbers, worrying about loans, questioning whether I was on the right path. Yet every small success brought me closer to the promise I had made to my mother, to live well, live kindly, and make her proud. Allison was indispensable. She wasn't just my wife, she was my friend, my mentor, the one who pulled me from brooding. She still worked at the law office, now promoted to paralegal, desk buried under papers, but her smile never faltered. "Charles, you worry too much," she'd say, resting her hand on my shoulder when I froze in front of my computer. "We're doing fine. Just breathe. Everything will be okay." She was always right. Together, we weathered the toughest days, from my near penniless beginnings in Gulfport to the small, heated arguments sparked by stress. Each time, we emerged holding hands tighter. Then, in 2020, a turning point arrived. An old client, Mr. Thompson, a seasoned real estate investor, called with a proposal, a partnership. He wanted me to develop a small beachfront resort with condos overlooking the Gulf of Mexico. "You've got an eye for this, Charles," he said, his voice steady. "You don't just sell land, you sell dreams. I need someone like you." It was a chance I couldn't pass up. I agreed, knowing it was a gamble. The project demanded every ounce of my savings, time, and energy. But I saw an opportunity, and as my father had once told me, when the opportunity comes, you grab it tight. The 2 years that followed were grueling. I worked with contractors, architects, and city officials to secure permits. There were moments I felt on the brink of collapse. A contractor quit midway, a bank loan was denied, and summer storms delayed progress. But I refused to give up. I remembered my mother's words. "You're stronger than you think." I recalled those first fragile days in Gulfport, with only Allison and hope to keep me afloat. I clung to my promise. The past would not define my future. By 2022, the resort was complete. On opening day, I stood on the balcony of a model condo, gazing at the sea sparkling in the sunlight. Children's laughter echoed from the beach, and families moved in with excitement. Mr. Thompson shook my hand, a rare smile breaking across his weathered face. "You did great, Charles." I chose well. I smiled, but inside I wanted to shout. I called Allison, voice trembling. "Babe, we did it." Her laugh came across the line, bright and joyful. "You did it, Charles. I knew you would." The success meant more than money. It was a milestone. Allison and I used the profits for a down payment on a home, our home. Not an apartment, not a rental, but a small, cozy white wooden house with a porch overlooking the Gulf. The day we signed the papers, I stood before the house, keys in hand, feeling as if I'd conquered the world. Allison wrapped her arms around me from behind, whispering, "This is our home, Charles. For you, me, and the kids." Yes, the kids. We had 2 little angels. Julian, 3 years old, with blue eyes like my mother's, and Scarlett, just 1, who giggled whenever I held her. Moving day was unforgettable. We held a small celebration, inviting the Youngs, a few close friends, and even Mr. Thompson. The front lawn buzzed with laughter, the smell of barbecue filling the air, and Julian ran around with a little ball. Donna brought a tray of her homemade cornbread, while Walter recounted stories from his days as a ship captain, leaving everyone doubled over with laughter. Allison stood beside me, hand in mine. "See, Charles? This is our family. This is where we belong." I nodded, tears pricking my eyes. For the first time in 12 years, I felt truly at home. Yet even in these happiest moments, the scar of the past throbbed quietly. Some nights, when the house was silent, I'd sit on the porch, listening to the waves and thinking of my mother. I imagined her standing there, smiling at me, proud that I had persevered. But then the image of my father and Lorraine would creep in, a thorn in my heart. I had no idea where they were or what they were doing. Aunt Mary had long stopped speaking of them, only saying my father was doing fine, offering no details. I told myself I didn't care. Yet sometimes I wondered, did he ever think of me? Did he regret that slap, choosing Lorraine over his own son? I pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the present. Julian and Scarlett were my greatest joys. Julian followed me around the house, asking endless questions. "Daddy, does the sea ever sleep?" Scarlett loved nestling in my arms, gripping my finger, giggling. Looking at them, I saw my mother, the gentleness, the strength, in their faces. I wanted to be the father she would have been proud of, not the man who had been betrayed by my own father. Every night, I told Julian bedtime stories, just as my mother had done for me. Once upon a time, there was a brave, kind little knight. I'd begin, and he'd listen, eyes shining. Allison and I continued building our life together. We expanded our investments, acquiring more plots, and I began consulting for new investors. Work became a passion, not a burden. I loved helping others realize their dreams, just as I had built mine. Our beachfront house became a symbol of independence, a testament to the years spent fighting to stand tall. Each time I looked at it, I reminded myself, I made it. But life, as I'd learned, never lets you rest too long. Just as I believed I had found peace, a shadow from the past loomed, threatening everything I had built. My father, the man I thought had disappeared forever, was about to re-enter my life, bringing Lorraine with him, dredging up memories I had buried. I didn't know it yet, but deep down, I sensed a storm approaching. It was an early summer afternoon in 2025. The Gulfport sky was clear and blue, a gentle sea breeze drifting across our porch. Julian played with building blocks on the rug while Scarlett slept soundly in her crib, her cheeks rosy and soft. Allison was in the kitchen preparing dinner, the aroma of fried fish and cornbread filling the house. I sat in an armchair, reviewing a real estate contract, content with the steady rhythm of our life. Our beachfront house, though modest, was the fruit of years of sweat and determination. Every brick, every window frame bore the mark of Allison and me. I believed I had found a place to heal, a place to be a father, a husband, and myself. Then the doorbell rang, shattering the calm. I frowned. We weren't expecting anyone. Allison peeked from the kitchen. "Honey, who is it?" I shook my head, stood, and opened the door. My heart stopped. There stood my father, George Beckwith, hair streaked with silver, face more gaunt than I remembered, but unmistakably him. The eyes I had once admired, now only bringing pain. Beside him was Lorraine, blonde curls and bright red lipstick unchanged, though time had added faint wrinkles to her face. They were a living portrait from the past, making me step back, hand gripping the doorframe. "Charles," my father said, forcing a smile. "It's been a long time, son." I was frozen. 12 years. No calls. No messages. No attempt to reach me. And now he stood at my doorstep, calling me son. Lorraine's eyes swept over me, appraising before she smirked. "Oh, Charles, you look well. Nice house. Must have cost a fortune, huh?" Her voice dripped with false sweetness, as though we were old friends, and a cold fire ignited inside me. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "What are you doing here, Dad?" I asked, my voice sharp and cold. Allison appeared behind me, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder, her eyes full of concern. My father glanced at her, then back at me. "We're family, Charles. I wanted to see you, see how you're doing." I almost laughed, but it was a bitter, hollow sound. "Family? Since when?" "Not since the slap at my mother's funeral. Not since he chose Lorraine and erased my mother's memory." Lorraine's voice cut through the tension, shrill and sweet, dripping with false familiarity. "Charles, aren't you going to invite us in? It's been a long trip, and we're tired. And we'd love to meet our grandchildren." She emphasized grandchildren as if Julian and Scarlett belonged to her. My blood boiled, but Allison squeezed my hand gently, a silent plea to stay calm. "Come in," I said finally, my voice dry, opening the door wider. I hadn't wanted them here, but I refused to make a scene in front of the kids. They stepped inside. Lorraine immediately began scanning the house, her eyes assessing every detail. "Lovely place," she said, touching a painting on the wall. The one my mother had painted, her final gift to me. I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to snatch it from her hands. My father sank into the sofa with an exaggerated sigh, as if the weight of the world rested on him. "Son, I know the past wasn't great," he began, voice low, measured. "But things are different now." Lorraine and we've been through some tough times. I thought we could stay here for a while. Be closer to you. I froze. Stay here? In my house, the house Allison and I had poured our sweat and tears into. I searched his eyes for a sign of jest, but all I saw was seriousness, tinged with awkwardness. Lorraine jumped in, just to stir the fire. And just a bit, Charles. We're strapped for cash. You're his son, it's only natural to help your parents, right? She smiled, a smile that made my stomach twist. I turned to Allison, whose face had gone pale. Julian, sensing the tension, ran to cling to her leg. Scarlett began crying in her crib. I drew a deep breath, trying to summon control. Dad, I said, my voice trembling with anger. You abandoned me for 12 years. Not a single word. And now you show up, expecting to stay in my house like nothing happened. My father lowered his head, mumbling. Charles, I was wrong. But I'm your father. We're blood. Blood. The word cut like a knife. I remembered the slap at the funeral, his cold eyes as he kicked me out. I remembered my mother lying in her coffin while he held Lorraine's hand and smiled. Blood doesn't mean anything when you chose her over Mom and me, I said, voice low but sharp. Lorraine laughed. Oh, you're still bitter about the past. Grow up, Charles. If it weren't for your father paying for your education, you wouldn't be where you are today. Her words poured fuel on the fire inside me. I wanted to scream, to throw them both out immediately. But Allison's hand gripped mine, her whisper steady and grounding. Charles, stay calm. Don't let them ruin everything. I looked into her eyes, seeing the strength I had always leaned on. Fine, I said, turning back to my father. You can stay, but only for 2 weeks. After that, I want you gone. My father nodded, relief washing over his face, while Lorraine shrugged, as if she had expected me to cave. I didn't know if I'd made the right decision, but one thing was certain: the storm had arrived, and it wasn't going anywhere soon. 2 weeks. I thought I could endure 2 weeks. I was wrong. From the first day, my father and Lorraine turned my home into a battlefield. Every cherished memory was violated. Every ounce of peace we built was threatened. Lorraine rifled through kitchen cabinets, criticizing Allison's cooking. Fried fish like this? We do it better in Wisconsin. My father plopped himself into the armchair, blasting sports programs Allison and I never watched. They barked orders, made demands, and never offered thanks. Julian, usually lively, became timid. He clung to Allison whenever Lorraine approached. Scarlett, barely over a year old, cried more than usual, sensing the tension in the air. Allison tried to keep the peace, but exhaustion was written on her face. Charles, I don't know how much longer I can handle this, she whispered one night as we lay in bed, listening to my father snoring from the living room. They don't respect us, or this house. I knew she was right. I tried to endure, hoping the 2 weeks would pass quickly. But each day, their presence dug deeper into old wounds. My father constantly referenced the past to justify himself. Charles, if it weren't for me, you wouldn't have gone to Northwestern, he said once when I refused to buy the expensive liquor he demanded. Lorraine mocked me relentlessly. You're living like this because of your father, so don't act high and mighty. I clenched my teeth, holding my tongue, but every word felt like a punch. The breaking point came one evening while Allison prepared dinner. Lorraine sauntered into the kitchen, helping herself to a bottle of wine from the cabinet, the very bottle Walter had gifted us for our wedding anniversary. You're so stingy, Charles, she said, pouring herself a glass. Living in a nice house like this, and you're skimping on a bottle of wine? Lorraine scoffed. Allison, who had always been patient, finally snapped. You have no right to touch our things. Lorraine laughed, sharp and mocking. Oh, the little wife is getting mad. Charles, teach her some manners. I stood, gripping Allison's hand. Enough. You're staying in our house. Stop acting like you own it. My father, sitting at the dining table, roared. Charles, how dare you speak to us like that, ungrateful brat? The word hit me like a slap, dragging back that day in the church. I glared at him, heart pounding. You have no right to call me that, I said, voice trembling with anger. You abandoned me. Abandoned Mom. And now you want to destroy my family, too? The tension in the air was like a taut bowstring. Lorraine jabbed a finger at me. You should be grateful to your father, you arrogant little punk. I stood there in my own home, feeling like a stranger. Julian clung tightly to Allison's leg, eyes wide with fear. Scarlett wailed in her crib, her cries slicing through my heart. Allison gripped my hand, her eyes steady though I could see her holding back her own emotions. Enough, I said, voice low but sharp. You're here because I allowed it. But don't think you can order us around. Lorraine smirked, and my father shook his head, muttering something about disrespectful kids. I turned, pulling Allison and Julian out of the dining room, trying to stop my heart from shattering. But that was only the beginning. In the days that followed, the home Allison and I had built with sweat and tears became a war zone. My father and Lorraine behaved as though they owned everything. Lorraine rifled through the kitchen, taking food without asking, even throwing out soup Allison had made because it didn't meet her taste. My father claimed my favorite armchair and blasted the TV from morning until late at night. They demanded Allison cook their favorite dishes, pressured me to buy expensive liquor, and even complained that our home was too modest compared to their luxurious Madison apartment. Charles, you make money and live like this? Lorraine sneered one afternoon, her tone dripping with sarcasm. I thought you were supposed to be a big shot. Julian and Scarlett suffered the most. Julian, who used to run through the yard with his ball, now only dared play in his bedroom with the door closed. Lorraine scolded him once for spilling water. Clumsy kid. Big, but no brains, huh? Julian ran to me, tears streaming. I held him tight, trying to comfort him, but rage boiled inside me. Scarlett cried more than usual, her laughter gone, replaced by anxious wails. Allison, no matter how patient, began to crack. Charles! I can't take it anymore, she whispered one night as we lay in bed, listening to Lorraine's shrill laughter from the living room. They're destroying our family. She was right. Every day, my father and Lorraine's presence poisoned the house. They weren't just physically intruding, they were stealing our peace. My father frequently invoked the past as justification. You should be grateful for what I've given you instead of turning your back on family, he said, voice smug. Family? I wanted to scream that he'd destroyed our family the day he held Lorraine's hand at Mom's funeral. But I held back, for Julian, for Scarlett, for Allison, and for the promise I made to my mother, to live kindly. After 5 grueling days, I couldn't take it anymore. On the 6th morning, I took Allison, Julian, and Scarlett to Walter and Donna's house. Stay here a few days, love, I said, kissing Allison's forehead. I'll handle this. Walter clapped my shoulder, stern but supportive. Charles, you're the man of your family. Don't let them take what you've built. Donna hugged me. We're always here if you need us, son. Protect your little family no matter what. I nodded, feeling like a knight preparing for battle. When I returned home, my father and Lorraine were still acting entitled. Lorraine lounged on the sofa, eating cookies from Julian's box, while my father rifled through papers on my desk. What are you doing? I shouted, voice trembling. Lorraine shrugged. Relax, Charles. We're just looking over your stuff. Maybe we can help. I realized then that the 2 weeks would never end unless I acted. They had no intention of leaving. They wanted control. They wanted to turn my home into theirs. But I wasn't the 23-year-old student slapped at a funeral anymore. I was Charles Beckwith, a man who had overcome grief, built a family, and would not let anyone take that away. Back at the Youngs, I felt a renewed determination. Julian played with Walter in the backyard while Scarlett slept in Donna's arms. Allison sat beside me, eyes full of worry but also trust. Charles, what's your plan? She asked. I took her hand. Don't worry. I'm taking our home back. I started by calling a reputable Gulfport lawyer, Henry Canales. That afternoon, in his tidy office, I laid out the whole story: my father, Lorraine, the slap at Mom's funeral, and how they were trying to seize control of my home. Henry listened, nodding. Charles, you have clear legal rights. The house is in your and Allison's name. No one can dispute that. But we must act carefully to avoid long-term complications. He suggested drafting an official notice demanding my father and Lorraine leave within 48 hours, with police enforcement if necessary. They have no right to stay without your consent, he said. But stay calm. Don't let emotions take over. I nodded, anger still simmering beneath the surface. I didn't just want them gone. I wanted them to understand they couldn't keep hurting me. I also contacted an old friend, Jordan, a Gulfport police officer. He listened to everything, shaking his head in disbelief. Charles, I still can't believe he's your father, Allison whispered, squeezing my hand. But don't worry. If it comes to it, I'll bring backup. With Jordan and Henry at my side, I felt steadier, but I knew this wasn't just a legal battle. Confronting my father and Lorraine was a mental war. I had to prove I was no longer the helpless boy I'd been all those years ago. 2 days later, I returned home with the legal notice from Henry. My father and Lorraine were still there, acting as though they owned the place. Lorraine lounged in front of the TV while my father sipped coffee from one of Allison's mugs at the dining table. I took a steadying breath, walked in, and set the notice on the table. This is an official notice, I said, voice calm but firm. You have 48 hours to leave my house. If you don't, the police will intervene. Lorraine laughed, sharp and mocking. You'd kick out your own father? That's ridiculous. My father's eyes flared with anger. Charles, who do you think you are? I'm your father. I met his gaze without flinching. You lost that right the day you slapped me at Mom's funeral. This is my home, my wife's, my children's. You don't belong here. The room felt suffocatingly tense. Lorraine jabbed a finger at me. You'll regret this, Charles. We're your family. I shook my head. My family is Allison, Julian, and Scarlett. You're just the past. I turned and left the house, leaving them with the notice. I knew they wouldn't leave quietly, but I was ready. Exactly 48 hours later, I returned, heart heavy but resolute. Jordan came with me, flanked by 2 colleagues in dark blue uniforms, their expressions serious. When I pushed open the door, my heart clenched. My father and Lorraine were still there, their belongings scattered across the living room. Open suitcases, clothes thrown across the sofa, even an unwashed coffee mug sat on Allison's dining table. They had no intention of leaving, as though daring me, and the law itself. Jordan stepped forward, his voice deep and commanding. Mr. and Mrs. Beckwith, you are ordered to leave this house immediately. This is the private property of Charles Beckwith. You have no right to remain. Lorraine flinched, her face blanching, but quickly regained her smug expression. She jumped to her feet, blonde hair tousled, pointing at Jordan. You can't do this. We're family. I'm his stepmother. Her shrill voice echoed, but it no longer fazed me. I looked at my father, expecting a word, but he remained seated, eyes vacant, as if his spirit had left him. For the first time, I saw him as frail, not the man who had slapped me at Mom's funeral. I stepped forward, placing Henry's legal notice on the table, voice calm but icy. Dad, Lorraine, you were warned. This is my house. Allison's my kids. You have no place here. Lorraine's eyes blazed. You dare, Charles? Kicking out your own father? You ungrateful brat? I didn't respond. I just stared into her eyes, then turned to my father, who remained silent, head bowed. Dad, I said, voice low but steady. 12 years ago, you kicked me out of Mom's funeral. Now it's my turn to ask you to leave. Fair, isn't it? The air was thick, almost suffocating. Lorraine muttered curses under her breath as she packed. My father rose slowly, hands trembling as he picked up an old suitcase. His shoulders slumped, face etched with deep wrinkles. I noticed how much he had aged. A flicker of pity crossed me, but memories of my mother, the slap, and years of loneliness hardened me again. I owed him nothing. The door opened, golden sunlight streaming in. Neighbors had gathered outside, whispering and shaking their heads. I saw Mrs. Jenkins, who often brought cookies for Julian, watching with quiet sympathy. Lorraine, dragging her suitcase, turned back and shouted, "You'll regret this, Charles! You'll be alone forever, you ungrateful jerk!" Her words rang out, but they no longer touched me. I stood at the door, hands in my pockets, watching them walk toward an old pickup parked by the road. My father glanced back once, locking eyes with me for a brief moment, but he said nothing. He climbed into the truck, slammed the door, and it drove off, leaving only a thin trail of dust on the coastal road. Jordan placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice calm and reassuring. "You did the right thing, Charles. They have no right to stay where they don't belong. Now go back to your real family." I nodded, feeling as if a weight had lifted from my chest. I glanced back at the house, the home Allison and I had built with years of sweat and tears. Though it had been invaded, it remained ours. It was still filled with Julian's laughter, Scarlett's babbling, and Allison's love. I drove back to the Youngs' house, a lightness mingled with lingering bitterness in my chest. As soon as I walked in, Julian ran into my arms. "Daddy, are the old people gone?" he asked, hugging me tightly. I knelt, ruffling his hair and smiling. "Yes, buddy. Our house is ours again." Allison emerged from the kitchen, her eyes bright, though tinged with concern. She hugged me, whispering, "Are you okay, Charles?" I held her close, feeling the warmth of the woman who had stood by me through every storm. "I'm okay, love. Thank you for everything." Donna brought Scarlett over, the little girl giggling and reaching for me. I lifted her into my arms, kissed her cheek, and felt a sense of healing begin to wash over me. Walter clapped me on the shoulder. "Son, you protected your family. Your mother in heaven must be so proud." I nodded, eyes stinging. Despite everything, our house was still ours. This time, I had won, not with force, but with resilience, love, and the justice I knew my mother would have approved. The next morning, we returned to our beachfront home together. As I pushed the door open, the familiar space almost felt foreign. The smell of stale coffee, the marks on the sofa, the lingering tension left by my father and Lorraine still clung to the air. But sunlight streamed through the windows, glinting off my mother's painting, a reminder that this was still our home. Allison began cleaning, humming softly, while Julian ran outside clutching his ball, laughing as though nothing had happened. Scarlett crawled across the floor, babbling. "Da-da!" I stood watching them, a warmth spreading through my chest. We had reclaimed our home, not merely with legal papers, but through love and unity. Yet, the memories of my father and Lorraine lingered. The slap at my mother's funeral, my father's cold eyes, Lorraine's shrill voice, they echoed in quiet moments when I sat on the porch listening to the waves. I no longer hated him, but I didn't forgive him either. I realized forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing to live so the pain no longer controls you. I had done it for my mother, for Allison, for my children, and for myself. A week later, I took the family to Madison, Wisconsin, to visit my mother's grave, the first time since marrying Allison. The road to the cemetery was unchanged, lined with maple trees blazing with red leaves under the autumn sun. I held Allison's hand and carried Scarlett, while Julian ran ahead, thrilled by the adventure. Before my mother's headstone, engraved Annabel Beck, loving mother, forever cherished, I knelt, placing a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite, on the grave. "Mom," I whispered, tears welling, "I did it. I've lived well, just like you always wanted." Julian tilted his head. "Daddy, who's this?" I smiled, ruffling his hair. "This is your grandma, the one who loved me more than anyone." Allison placed her hand on my shoulder. "She must be smiling somewhere, Charles." Scarlett reached out, touching the headstone as if sensing the presence of the grandmother she never met. I stood there in the quiet cemetery, feeling my mother's presence, embracing me as she once had when I was a child. On the drive back to Gulfport, I reflected on everything: our joyful days in Madison, the tragedy of losing my mother, my father's betrayal, and the journey of building a life in Gulfport. Life had been cruel, but it taught me invaluable lessons. I learned that family isn't just blood, it's those who stand by you, even when life drags you into darkness. Allison, Julian, Scarlett, Walter, and Donna, they were my true family. My father and Lorraine were now only shadows from the past. I also realized that justice isn't revenge, it's protecting what you cherish. When I forced my father and Lorraine out, I felt no triumph, only relief. I had safeguarded my family not with force, but with resilience and the conviction of what was right. Most importantly, I learned that no scar, no matter how deep, could stop me from living fully. Each time I watched Julian run through the yard, heard Scarlett babble, or felt Allison's warmth beside me, I knew I had turned pain into motivation rather than letting it define me. As our car rolled past the golden wheat fields, I turned to Allison. "Babe, if someone asked me about my life tomorrow, what would I say?" She laughed, eyes sparkling. "You'd say life is a journey. What matters is who you choose to walk with, and what you choose to protect." I squeezed her hand. From the back seat, Julian shouted, "Daddy, tell the night story." I laughed, starting. "Once upon a time, there was a brave, kind little knight." As the sunset cast a golden glow across the road, I thought of the lessons I wanted to share with anyone weighed down by the past. Cherish those who love you, they are the fire that warms you through the coldest nights. Stand tall after every fall, each scar proves you survived. And no matter how harsh life may be, you always have the power to choose how to live. With resilience, with love, and with hope. Our beachfront home was alive once more. Julian and Scarlett played in the yard, Allison prepared dinner, and I sat on the porch, gazing at the sparkling sea. I didn't know what the future held or if I could ever fully let go of the past. But I knew one thing: I had found where I belonged, and I would protect it at all costs. Life, as my mother once said, is where you return, no matter where it takes you. And I, Charles Beckwith, had finally found my way.